Good afternoon, Keller Williams. This is Steve Schleter, Maps Coach. It's December 31st, New Year's Eve, and I'm here with just a special treat for you, a little pricing tip that will help you get things priced right in 2009 and also help you with some of those critical dialogues you have to have with some of your sellers right now who aren't priced where they need to be to get their home sold in the current marketplace. And so what we're going to share with you today is what I call the Intelligent Seller's Guide to Pricing. Something I've been using since 1988 to help sellers price correctly and not chase a market down in the kind of environment we're in today. So we're going to jump right into this in the interest of time and to just give you a quick resource. Now, first of all, what would happen is I would do the CMA as I usually did with a seller, establish a price range, and then I would ask them, say, how much experience do you have in pricing? And they'll typically say, well, not much. Say, well, may I educate you on some strategies that I believe are really critical in terms of deciding how to price your home in today's market? And of course, they'll say yes. And so then I start with a blank sheet and I draw this out, 3 horizontal lines, 2 vertical, and I label them, and I do this with them, premium, market or retail or wholesale, and then the vertical lines I'm going to label trend, and then staging and time. And so when we sit down with a seller, I say, well, Mr. and Ms. Smith, in establishing the price range for your property, we came up with a range, the premium was maybe about $219,000 would be the maximum anything has really sold in your area. Looking at what has most recently sold in the most recent pending activity, it looks like we could justify, as high as 205 and kind of be, right on the market price. And if we really needed to sell it fast, sell it tomorrow, that wholesale price, deep discounted, would probably be like 170, 165. Of course, not a price that we really want to talk about. So the question becomes then, what's the right price for you and for your home? And the first thing we have to look at and we understand is, what's the trend in the market, Mr. and Ms. Smith? And when I think of trend, we look at it 2 ways. So the first trend would be if it were, what we would call trending towards a seller's market. A seller's market would be defined as a marketplace where we had very little inventory of homes available for sale and high demand. Homes selling quickly, you see sold signs as fast as you see the signs go up. So the opposite end of that would be a trending towards a buyer's market, which would be a market where we have an abundance of inventory, lots of homes for sale, and not an abundance of buyers. And so the question becomes, Mr. and Ms. Smith, watching the market, paying attention to the media, having a sense of what's going on just in your own neighborhood, and not to mention our community, where would you say the trend is leaning towards right now? A seller's market, or is it leaning towards a buyer's market? And we know today that most certainly the answer is going to be buyer's market in 99% of our markets today. So that being the case, we say, okay, well, keeping that in mind, the other thing we have to consider in terms of where to price your home is time frame, time we have available to sell and market your home, when you have to be where you need to be, and then staging, which would be defined as condition. Do we have your house really packaged right? Is it showtime? And is it staged appropriately? Studies have proven staged homes sell faster and for the maximum dollar. So we know that plays a factor too. With regard to time, however, time in a market where we have, a seller's market where we don't have lots of impediments to getting buyers into a home, time might be our ally in a seller's market. But let me ask you this, Mr. and Ms. Smith, in a buyer's market, why might time not be our ally? And that's a question that you want them to answer. And it's real clear to them that, well, as you're drawing this out, that if the trend is that way, that means that over time, if the trend is continuing in that way, that may be eroding value. Time may equal eroding value in terms of the equity in their home. And so time in today's market, that's a buyer's market, is not our friend. So as an intelligent seller, understanding that time's not our friend today, that we have to price ahead of the market, given 219 is of course the highest end of the range, 205 seems to be more typically what things have been selling for, and is justifiable. And then of course keep in mind wholesale is really a price we don't want to get to. But thinking competitively, thinking about the kind of market we're in today, for you to be truly competitive and make sure that you're able to make that move to San Diego and be there, in the desired time frame, what would be a competitive price based upon the trend and this understanding? And many times you just ask the question, they'll say, well, probably they'll say a little below the market or retail price, so that we're kind of, because of the trend, we probably need to be a little lower. And they might say 200 or 199, which, that would be a smart, intelligent seller's decision. That would be the smart move. They might say, well, I'd like to try the 205. That would be justified, but we might want to just make sure we have a discussion about the trend, and that just being at what's justifiable may not be ahead of the market, may not be ahead of the trend, and we could get caught behind if we weren't careful. If we're going to be right at market, we're going to have to be superiorly staged and packaged really well. And so now let's say you have the seller who says, well, the agent over at ABC Realty said, we could list it at 215 and we could always come down. And we really want to try a little higher to start. So they're lobbying for 215, and you'd say, well, that's okay, we could do that. But there's some inherent risk with that. Can I explain? And you say, well, let me explain. So what do you think this line that I just drew here represents, Mr. Mismet? And they'll say, well, I'm not sure. And I said, well, that is future wholesale. And based upon the trend, that's where the market is heading. And so if that's future wholesale, that means right about in here is what? Is future market or future retail. Which means that premium is coming down probably to your 215 mark. And if we've gone 60 days and the trend stays pronounced, all of a sudden you find yourself not between premium and market, you find yourself truly at premium. And then you're not getting the activity that you desire. And you say, well, maybe Steve was right. Maybe we should have been closer to 200 or 205. And so you reduce your price, Mr. Smith, to 205, but now you're still where? You're in that no man's land between premium and market. So my suggestion is to avoid this little chase of chasing the market down, is that ideally, regardless of how much time you have, or even your willingness to adjust later, the smart play, the intelligent seller's play right now is to get out ahead of the market right away. Because if you don't, here's what's at risk. Is that it's kind of like chasing a slinky, down the stairs. If you're going to chase a slinky down the stairs or try to catch a slinky and stop a slinky, you could run down the stairs bending over trying to catch it, but in motion that's probably going to result in a crash. So if you're really going to stop the slinky, what do you have to do? And you ask the question. And most of them will say, well, I guess you have to get in front of it. And see, it's no different here in terms of how we're addressing this. We got to get in front of the slinky. We have to get in front of the market, which means we need to, as much as we possibly can, get ahead of this curve, be firm if we have to on pricing, but give ourselves an opportunity to be in the market. And then make ourselves stand out with superior staging so that we're able to hold the line on our price by being the best value out in the marketplace today. So this is what I call the Intelligent Seller's Guide to Pricing. And you don't make this a flip chart page that you have in your binder, because simply this is to educate, not sell. And it really is what happens out there. And this is an education process, not a sales process. And so what I encourage you to do is just have a legal pad and draw this out on a legal pad as you discuss this with your sellers to get listings priced appropriately and in the market.